Okay, good evening. Please have a seat. There's some seats in the front. I don't spit. I'm not a camel. Maybe Frank does. I don't know. But thank you for coming. And I want to start just by. I'm very thankful that we have a public library where we can get together and anybody can come and we can discuss all kinds of topics. And how many of you were here at the presentation during Easter week that I did on the evidence for the resurrection, or what really happened that first Easter? A couple of you. If you haven't seen that, if you sign, there's a pad of paper back there. If you put your email down there, I will email you a link to the presentation, and you can watch that. Actually, that's really the best evidence for Jesus, who he claims to be, and for the resurrection. I go through that very carefully from the beginning, from a legal, historical standpoint, to show that really beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond any doubt, there's nothing in the real world, as I explained, that's beyond any doubt, but beyond a reasonable doubt that this really happened. And that's really where the bulk of the evidence is. What we're doing tonight is going to be something that I didn't really get to, which is just to follow on a little bit about the prophecies in the Bible. Are there prophecies in the Bible that have been fulfilled? And if there are, then what does the Bible say about the present and the future? So that's what we're doing tonight. And if you want, how many of you were here for the problem of evil? Why do bad things happen to good people? A number of you were here for that too. If you want that, note next to your email that you would like that one too. We did that one back in June, I believe. So, and the next one we're going to do is going to be science and the Bible. So I guarantee you'll hear some things you probably have never heard before, and it will be fun. It'll be interesting. Most people think the Bible is religion and science is science, and the two are not really related. They're totally different. But I think you're going to be very surprised. That's going to be September 10th. And so, as I said already, there's a link if you just want to write down the link for the presentation I did on the resurrection. If you don't want to give me your email, that's fine. You can write down the link. So with that, we'll get started. My name is Perry Sherman, and I became interested when I was an undergrad at Case Western Reserve University in how do we know if anything happened in the past or not? How do we test whether something happened? And I became very interested in the question of, there's a lot of religious claims out there, and is there evidence for any of them, or are they just claims and you follow them and you see if they fit you or not, or is there anything truth involved? I became very interested in that. I went on to Simon Greenleaf School of Law, got a degree trying to study how you test out claims, religious claims and other claims from history and eyewitness testimony. I graduated from there, and then I went back to school and became a psychologist. So I'm all over the map, but I'm interested in many different things. So tonight we're going to talk about prophecy. Any of you see the movie Back to the Future? Very, very creative, fun movie. And then there's a Back to the Future 2. How many of you saw Back to the Future 2? Well, in the movie, the mad scientist creates a DeLorean that when it gets up to 88 miles per hour, it can go wherever you want, in the past or in the future. And he sets a timeline, and Marty McFly, played by, who's he played by again? Michael J. Fox. Yeah, he's funny. He goes back in time, and he sees his parents when they're young, and all kinds of things happen. So, but in the second movie, there's a character that's a school bully that is mean to Marty McFly and mean to his dad when he's young and stuff. And he's kind of an antagonist in the movie, but he figures out how to get in this car and go back to the past. What he does, though, is he gets a magazine that has, it's called Sports Almanac, 1950 to 2000. So it's got all the statistics on all the sports teams. So what he does with this, I have a good idea. He goes back to the past, and you'll see what happens. He uses the information that he has, the knowledge of the future, to make bets and become rich and influence his life and history.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Biff Tannen Museum, dedicated to Hill Valley's #1 citizen and America's greatest living folk hero, the one and only Biff Tannen. Of course, we've all heard the legend, but who is the man? Inside, you will learn how Biff Tannen became one of the richest and most powerful men in America. Learn the amazing history of the Tannen family, starting with his great-grandfather, Buford Mad Dog Tannen, fastest gun in the West. See Biff's humble beginnings and how a trip to the racetrack on his 21st birthday made him a millionaire overnight. Share in the excitement of a fabulous winning streak that earned him the nickname, the luckiest man on earth. Learn how Biff parlayed that lucky winning streak into the vast empire called Biffco. Discover how in 1979 Biff successfully lobbied to legalize gambling and turned Hill Valley's dilapidated courthouse into a beautiful casino hotel.
I just want to say one thing. God bless America.
Meet the women who shared in his passion as he searched for true love. And relive Biff's happiest moment as in 1973 he realized his lifelong romantic dream by marrying his high school sweetheart, Lorraine Baines McFly.
Third time's a charm.
No! Hey, no! Hey, Greg, you come with us upstairs.
There we go, Sonny. We can do this the easy way or the hard way.
The easy way.
All right, there we are. So there you have it. He goes back in time, and he is able to affect his own future, of course, for selfish reasons. So the question is, what if we could know the future? Would you want to? We're getting to a point in some ways that we can do genetic testing, and we can know with high probability what certain genetic disease risks are. And there's a big debate about whether or not to test people and give them that information. If you had a high risk for a genetic disease in the future, would you want to know? And this is a big question. What do we want to know about the future, and why do we want to know it? And is there a way to know anything about the future? Well, I'm going to be talking about the Bible and prophecy, but I want to start by talking a little bit about time and prophecy. Now, we have a timeline that we're on. It's progressive. We can't go to the past. We can't go into the future. We only live in the present. And we know a bit about the present. We don't know all over the world everything that's going on, but in our world, we know the most about the present. The past, we know less. We forget things, and the further in the past you go, the less you know. If you go to 2000 BC, you know less. Yesterday, maybe you know a little bit more. But we see into the past, but not perfectly. The future, we don't know really very much at all. But what if there was an all-seeing eye that was outside of time and in eternity, or in a place that's timeless? Then this all-seeing eye could see all of time, and that could give us a perspective. That is really the only way that, being outside of the dimension of time, we could know the past, the future, and the present completely. Edwin Abbott, in 1884, a mathematician, wrote a book called Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions. Anybody who's a mathematician or taken math, Ashley studied math, and she's teaching math now, but they read this book. He wrote about how the idea of different dimensions. If you have 2 dimensions and you have a 3-dimensional object, and when it intersects the 2 dimensions, it all of a sudden appears out of nowhere. But if you had 3 dimensions, I can see all over this floor at once. But if I was only in 2 dimensions, I could only see what's right next to me. So you can imagine more and more dimensions. We now have a lot of ideas in physics. Physicists, most of them do believe that there's more than 4 dimensions. 4-dimensional reality, length, width, height, and time are what we live in. But there is pretty good evidence that there's more than 4 dimensions. Now, if you were outside of the dimension of time, then you would have a perspective that's very different from ours. So, and we're going to talk about that would be what prophecy is. Some information that would be coming from another dimensional realm. The definition you can have of prophecy, one of them is that you're speaking for God, but we're going to use a narrower definition here, which is foretelling or predicting what is to come. So the question is it real? Biblical prophecy, is it real? Is it not? Lots of people claim to predict the future. Jean Dixon made a lot of predictions. Some of them came true, some of them didn't. She predicted the Russians would be the first to land a man on the moon. We all know how that turned out. That Nixon would not resign. We all know how that turned out. That the Vietnam War would be over by 1966. We all know how that turned out. Those didn't turn out too well. She predicted that a Democrat would die in office, not necessarily in the first term, and then Kennedy was assassinated in the first term. But if you look at all Democratic presidents and which ones are assassinated, you could have some probability that's reasonable of having some Democrat die. It doesn't say he was going to get assassinated, but you have some probability. You have it's not a 100% hit, but it's a hit ratio. Nostradamus, he has some predictions that he hits, some he doesn't. The Delphic Oracle in Greece, my ancestors were Greek, but the Delphic Oracle would give very vague prophecies. If you open up a Chinese fortune cookie, you get a fortune in there. It's kind of vague. And if you look at the horoscopes, anybody could probably meet kind of, you're going to be successful. Well, sometime in your life, you're going to maybe be successful. So they're very vague. Other prophecies, there's no real significant prophecies in other scriptures. Mormonism doesn't have any significant prophecies that you can check and see and test. Islam doesn't really have any significant prophecies. They do claim that there's one that happened 7 years after, but it's kind of a little debatable. And the other things that they say, there's not very many really. Buddhism, Hinduism, they're not really about trying to make predictions. They're about really ways of life. So the Bible, on the other hand, is different, and we're going to get into that. I'm going to just say a little bit about predictions about the future. Some predictions can be made by extrapolation, past data. The weather tomorrow. We see the weather patterns, and we can predict what's going to happen tomorrow. But you know that's not 100% accurate. The weatherman makes mistakes, doesn't he? The prognosis for liver cancer. We have a probability, an idea of what the prognosis is for that. Many things we can, but none of them are 100% reliable, but they are better than chance. It's all based on our knowledge. And we can make predictions based on natural phenomena, like the trajectory of a satellite. We know the laws of Newtonian physics, and we can predict where that satellite's going to be. We can throw enough darts, we're bound to hit something. You have 100 prices on the board, and one of them's the price of the object you're trying to buy, and you throw 1,000 darts, one of them will hit the price. So if you make enough predictions, you're going to hit something. But that doesn't mean you know what you're doing. The higher the hit ratio positive, the more you know what you're doing. So the chances of guessing go down as the number of true predictions increase and the number of false ones go down. And the higher the specificity is. If you're very exact about what you're predicting, not vague, then the chances of guessing go down. As you increase the number of possible options, if you only have 2 options, I have a coin, I'm going to say, what do you predict, heads or tails? And it comes out tails, and George here predicted tails. Wow. Is he a prophet? No, we'd have 50% chance, so there's not a lot of possible options. There's only two. But if there's a lot of possible options, the chances go down. Predictions become more difficult when, with increased specificity, personal names, before the person's born, exact dates, etc. When free choice is involved, people can make choices, and you don't have control over what they're going to do. When an event is influenced by large numbers of people, factors, phenomena, so in psychology, it's harder to predict than it is in Newtonian physics. So, and the further away the event is in time, if I'm predicting the weather 100 years from now, I'm not going to do a very good job, but as I could do if I was predicting it for tomorrow. Now, I know that, okay, before we do that, I did my research. I did a PhD in psychology, and one of the things I did was research all the literature on men and women, how they talk to each other, and how men talk to men and women talk to women, and whether they would use more emotional words or less emotional words, and more connecting words and less connecting words, etc. I had 8 different predictions that I made based on my understanding of men and women in the literature, and 7 out of 8, before I even gathered any data, and I went and gathered the data, ran it through the computer program that had all these words rated on all these different scales, and 7 out of 8 came out as to be demonstrated as true. So I was wrong about one. That was about emotion. Actually, men and women both used the same intensity and number of emotional words. I thought women would use more emotional words, but I was wrong. So anyway, but the 7 out of 8 were proved correct. So that shows, wow, I must have really been close in what I was theorizing about how men and women work. But if I just said, I'm going to make 100 predictions, and then I find, well, 5 of them are true, and I send it to a paper to get published, well, they shouldn't publish that, because if I just make random predictions, I'm going to probably get some of them true. So, but the Bible is unique because there are 66 books. People think, here's a Bible. It's a book, but it's not. It's actually 66 books. There are 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New. They are written by 40 different authors over their letters, histories, poetry, songs, proverbs, laws, in peacetime, war, variety of situations and places, in 3 different languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, 3 different continents, by prophets, shepherds, tax collectors, fishermen, kings, captives, all walks of life. 66 different books spanning 1,600 years, and yet it all tells a continuous story. Now that is unique. There is nothing like it. There's nothing else like it. So if you look at other religious books and stuff, the Book of Mormon, it's only over a certain, only a generation. If you look at just the Quran, it's one man wrote. Actually, he didn't write them. He actually said them, and people after he died kind of said, this is what he wrote, and wrote it down because he was illiterate. Muhammad was illiterate, but one man. This is unique. You will not find this anywhere else. There's an estimated 2,500 prophecies in the Bible. I've seen different estimates that 27% of the words in the Bible are referring to some prediction about the future. There's about 2,000 are already fulfilled and 500 to come. If you read some books in the Bible, you're going to find prophecies on almost every page. I was reading 1 Kings, and it's like, oh, there's one. I would have trouble cataloging all these. So I have a big task tonight. Some are immediate, Daniel 5:26-30, where we've all heard of the writing on the wall. And Daniel says that the king, Belshazzar, that tonight the writing's on the wall. What it's saying, that there's a handwriting on the wall. He says, what does this mean? He says, well, tonight your kingdom's going to fall. And nobody thought the Babylonian Empire would fall. It had walls that were so thick, so wide that 2 chariots could pass on the top, going each way. Hard fired brick. And nobody had even imagined that they could besiege the city of Babylon, let alone in a day. But what happened, actually, historically, is the river that fed the city with water was dammed up, and the troops went in under the gate. So that's an immediate one. it's going to happen tomorrow. Some are the distant future, like Isaiah 66:8. How can a nation be born in a day? So there's that's a 700 BC in Ezra, and its fulfillment is in 1948, when Israel was born in a day, 2,650 years later. So that's a long time span. Often there's a near and a far fulfillment in the same paragraph. For example, 1 Kings 13:3, the sign that the prophet says that the altar is going to split. And then there's a prophecy that Josiah would be king, a specific person would be king, and that happened 300 years later, and that the false prophet's bones would be burned on that altar, which happened 300 years later. So there's a near and a far in the same paragraph. Sometimes a single prophecy has both a near and a far in it. Although the hearers didn't understand until later, there are no specific prophecies, no undisputable mistakes. So the Bible is accurate. Now some people dispute, well, I don't know, this doesn't, but there are answers to the ones that people select to say, well, I'm not sure, this doesn't make a lot of sense, but there are no undisputable mistakes. The Bible is accurate. So it's not like a random hit ratio. It's like a high hit ratio. And to be a prophet in the Bible, you had to be 100% correct. If you said something and you weren't speaking the truth, you were stoned. So Gene Dixon would not have made a lot of prophecies. Jehovah's Witness Watchtower, they would have been stoned already because they predicted the end of the world 4 times already. Wouldn't work. So you had a strict criteria in the Bible. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at, first of all, there's 2 things you have to establish to determine that a prophecy's happened. Number 1, that it really was prophesied at the time it was prophesied at, before the event happened. We're not going to use any different kind of technique, and I'm not going to go into this in great detail because you'll have to look at the presentation I did on the resurrection to look at how you to learn how you look at historical documents to see when they're written. And the evidence for the biblical documents is really very good. But if a technique doesn't work anywhere else in historical analysis and any other realm, then it's not going to work for religion. What we're going to do is we're going to use the same historical techniques. The Old Testament, the earliest manuscripts were 895 AD. So the manuscripts, that's a copy of what was written, hand copy. So these things were written on papyrus, they're written on animal skins, and animal skins deteriorate, and pieces of papyrus, they're organic material, they deteriorate over time. So the earliest manuscript that we had, up until, say, the 1940s, was from 895 AD. So these would be documents from the Old Testament that were written, the last Old Testament book written 400 years before Christ. So this would be over 1,300 years, almost 1,400 years later, is the earliest manuscript copy that we had. So this, critics would go wild with this. Skeptics see, it's this 1,400 years that people put things in, they changed a lot of things. It can't possibly have been transmitted accurately because that's a lot of time period. But actually what they didn't, the Jews were very accurate in transmitting and transposing to a new papyrus, and I'll show you that in a minute. But so critics would say that, but then came the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this discovery near the Dead Sea in the community of the Qumran, a shepherd was throwing stones. He heard something. He went up to investigate, and in a cave there were jars, and they were containing old documents, and these documents are now known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now what actually happened is that the Jews would take older copies when they became worn, and there was any risk that there might be a smudge on it or a tear and somebody might not read it correctly. They would not keep that document. They would copy it painstakingly and accurately to a new papyrus. And they had techniques. This is what they did. And they thought these were holy scriptures. They did it very painstakingly, very well. They counted the number of letters from the top to the bottom and the side to the side. It was said, it's been said by some, that a scribe could take a needle and stick it through the book, and he could tell you which verses it went through. That might be a little bit more than what happened, but the point is they were very, very scrupulous at checking exactly copying it. So they made sure they copied it accurately, and the older versions they would set aside and they would usually destroy because they didn't want somebody to misread it. So these are probably ones that were discarded and they weren't actually destroyed, they were put off in a cave, and we discovered them. So but that's why a lot of these documents didn't survive. So these Dead Sea Scrolls are from about 250 to 250 BC to 270 AD. They showed that there's an accurate transmission of the Old Testament texts. For example, there's a copy of the book of Isaiah I'm going to show you from 100, 200 or so before Christ. So that jumps the gap now from 890 to 200. That's 1,100 years. And the texts are exactly the same. They have not changed in that time period, showing that they are very accurately transmitted. So there's a copy of the Great Isaiah Scroll. It was found in the Dead Sea. And this is one of the documents, almost the entire book of Isaiah. And if you compare that to a modern Hebrew scripture of Isaiah, it's identical. Here is Gabriel Barclay. He discovered this in this tomb. There was a copy of the priestly blessing in the book of Numbers. Now this is dated, this is on silver, on a hammered piece of silver, so it didn't deteriorate. But the priestly blessing matches exactly what's in the book of Numbers, and this is from 600 BC. So you have, if there's a copy of the priestly blessing from the book of Numbers in 600 BC, was the book of Numbers written before 600 BC? Of course. If there's a copy of it, then it was written before that. So you've got these things clearly dated earlier, even though you might have some people at Princeton or Yale saying, well, I'm not sure, whatever. The evidence it doesn't support that. Again, also the Septuagint. Septuagint means 70, and in Alexandria on the northern coast of Africa, the Greeks who lived, actually the Jews who lived there, learned Greek, and they basically, their main language was Greek, so they decided to translate the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek. So it's said that 70 scholars were commissioned to do this work, and they translated it. So that's why it's called the Septuagint, the 70. But it's a translation of the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek, and it dates about 300 to 200 BC. So this is before Christ, when a translation of the Old Testament existed in Greek. So it contains the same books as our modern Bible, and there's a section that's called apocryphal, which is clearly not a part of that, but is included in the translation because it was of interest and historical value to them. But you can see some of it, an early manuscript copy on the right there of the Septuagint. So you have various evidences showing that these books are long before the 1st century. Archaeological evidence, again and again, it's not really a good idea to disagree with the Bible if you're an archaeologist, because you just wait a little while and some evidence pops up and oh well. It's been proved again and again. At one time it was believed that there are no such people as the Hittites. We've never discovered any evidence of the Hittites. So the Old Testament mentions the Hittites and the Jews are fighting the Hittites. Well, archaeologists discovered an entire Hittite civilization and a library in Turkey. So now, 200 years after all the critics were talking that there's no such thing, you can major in Hittite studies at some major universities. There's believed there's no such thing as a Jewish nation. Actually, there's no reference to the Jews. There's no other reference to the Jews. It's kind of just a story. It's a religious story. There wasn't really a King David. There really wasn't a Jewish nation. It's kind of it's allegorical, or it's story mythological. Well, numerous archaeological discoveries have disproved that. So I'm not going to go into those because we don't have time. but there's actually, within the last 15 years, was a discovery of an inscription by I believe the Syrian king mentioning the house of David. So there's a lot of archaeological discoveries that definitely support the Bible. So, but I'm going to read something from this. You tell me who this is talking about. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was like a lamb led to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of this generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer, and though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, and my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. So who's that talking about? You just read that to any random guy on the street, and they'll recognize that. When was this written? Isaiah 53. That Isaiah scroll, 200 years before Christ, and Isaiah was written, 700 BC. So it's not, now for a lot of these things, it's no good to say, well, they're not really referring to the Messiah. Sometimes some Jewish rabbis will say, well, it's really referring to Israel. It's not, that's a suffering, that's Israel's suffering. Well, pierced his side, let's kind of, maybe buried with a rich man and dying with, I don't know. They have to really kind of do some interesting things to try and explain those things. But this doesn't really work because the Jews were the audience in the first century, and they understood the passages as messianic. They didn't argue with this. As you see in my other presentation, the Jews were the audience for the disciples saying this is what happened, and this means this, and this means this. The Jewish leaders would have certainly blown it out of the water if they'd thought that those were not really referring to the Messiah. No, he wouldn't really be born in Bethlehem. He wouldn't be. You can't. It's not. Doesn't no good to say this. You have to take it from the standpoint of what they understood, and they were clearly saying they were understanding it as. If you look at commentaries from the early centuries, you'll see all the Jewish rabbis are considering these things as predicting the Messiah. So here's a Michael Schwartz picture of him up there. He died in 2011, but he worked on this piece of art, and I have a copy of it here. And it's the real one is actually larger than this. It's 4 feet wide. It's hanging in the Children's Museum in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. It took him 3 years to paint it. He was commissioned by the Rebbe. This is the most respected at the time Jewish rabbi in Brooklyn around the world. And he commissioned him to paint this painting, and it's called When Messiah Comes, which is when the Messiah comes, what it will be like when the Messiah comes. So he takes all the prophecies, all these prophecies about the Messiah, in the Torah, the Tanakh, which is basically the Old Testament, and also in the Jewish interpretations, the Talmud and the other Jewish rabbi writings about what it's going to look like. He takes all the prophecies about the Messiah, and he painted them in a painting. So each of those, there are 300,000 Hebrew characters on there making up that painting. Now you can almost see a lot of them here, but you can't see them all. You probably have to look at the 4-foot painting to see it. But they are, although they don't recognize that Jesus is the Messiah, they are recognizing that there are all these prophecies about the Messiah, and they're getting, anticipating and interested in the Messiah coming. And by the way, in the first century, there's a lot of anticipation, and you can see that in the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a lot of anticipation of the Messiah is going to come. Just like today, in this century and this century and maybe the last century, there's been a lot of anticipation of apocalypse, and you have movies on it. You have a lot of thoughts about what's happening. Well, that didn't happen for a lot of history, but I'm going to read here. Just go through this very quickly. But Jesus himself claimed that he would rise. Now, he's called a prophet, and one of the most important things he prophesied about is that he would die and he would rise on the third day. I'm not going to read this, but you can read it. John 2:18, Matthew 16:21. He's telling his disciples, I'm going to go to the elders, and they're going to hand me over, and I'm going to be killed, and on the third day I'm going to be raised to life. Now, they must have thought, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? We're expecting you to bring the kingdom in. You're the Messiah. They must have thought, what are you doing? But he was predicting what would happen to him. There's a bunch of other scriptures we can, but I'm not going to go into them here. And then the New Testament, I won't go into all that here either, but you can see that in the other presentation on the resurrection that I did, that the eyewitnesses clearly observed a Jesus who had been crucified and then him alive afterwards. But I'm not going to go into all that here. That would take a whole evening to do. But what I'm doing here is a little bit about the prophecies. And I'm just going to take out of the 2,000 prophecies, this is 23 prophecies. There are actually, depending on how you list them, 80 or 100 or some people say 300, depending on which ones, if you break them down into this is 2 prophecies, this is 1. But about the Messiah that Jesus fulfills. And here are 23. And I put the reference at the end, so if you see Messiah will descend from Shem, there's a 1 after it, a 2 after Abraham. So I'm listing them. But I'm putting them all just in a sentence so you can see them all together. The Messiah will descend from Shem, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, Jesse, and King David. He will be born in the city of Bethlehem, in the country of Ephrathah, when a bright star appears, and it will be a miraculous virgin birth. The Messiah will be unique, having pre-existed his birth. He will perform many miracles, calming the sea, causing the blind to see, and the deaf to hear, the lame to walk, and the mute to talk. And I'm not going to go into how we know that happened. You'd have to see my other presentation. But he will be referred to as God with us, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. One day he will rule over everything. All nations will bow down to him. The Messiah, however, will come to save mankind. He will become man's sin offering and present himself to Jerusalem as both the anointed king and the Passover lamb. This will occur exactly 173,880 days after the decree by Artaxerxes to rebuild the temple, both Jerusalem and the temple. So 4 days before Passover, the Messiah will present himself to a rejoicing Jerusalem riding on a donkey, but then he will suffer greatly. He will be rejected by many, including his friends will reject him. He will be betrayed by a friend for 30 pieces of silver. At his trial, he will not defend himself. He will say nothing. We just read some of that. Except as required by law. Israel will reject him. His own people, Israel, will reject him. The Messiah will be crucified, his hands and feet pierced. And this was, by the way, prophesied hundreds of years before crucifixion was even invented. His enemies will encircle him, mocking him, and will cast lots for his clothing. He will call, by the way, there's an interesting prophecy also that his tunic they'll have to cast lots because there's one tunic that they're going to be trying to get. They didn't tear his tunic. He will call to God asking why he was forsaken. He will be given gall and wine. He will die with thieves. But unlike the thieves, none of his bones will be broken, which is very unusual in a crucifixion. They broke people's bones, as I showed my previous presentation. The Messiah will be buried in a rich man's grave. That's unusual. In 3 days he will rise from the dead. Well, that's very unusual. So there's all the prophecies spanning from Genesis, Samuel, Isaiah, Daniel, Zechariah, Psalms, Numbers, Micah. Again, these are different authors. These are many different authors from different walks of life. So here's one of them. I'm just going into a little more detail. Daniel 9:20 to 27. 490 weeks from the decree to allow Jews to rebuild Jerusalem to Palm Sunday. Daniel 9:20 to 27 says there's going to be 490 weeks. Now, that really means 490 weeks of years is what it's talking about. So that means there is going to be, you calculate the number of years and the number of days in a year going by the Jewish lunar calendar. You can calculate exactly. It was 173, 880 days after a decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, that prophecy was made before the decree happened. The decree happened many years later. Artaxerxes actually made the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, and we know when that date was. It was March 4th, 444 BC. And Palm Sunday was April 6th, 33 AD. So that is exactly 100, if you calculate it, it's exactly 173,880 days. How does that happen? And this is why Jesus in Luke 19:24 says to the Jews, he says, "You did not recognize the time of your visitation." They should have known. They should have been able to calculate it. That day he was riding into Jerusalem, that exact day. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank, because not only have prophecies been fulfilled in the past, but there are things to come that the Bible is saying are happening today and are going to happen, and he's going to talk about that.
My name is Frank Ray, and I appreciate being here tonight and appreciate all you being here tonight. I think we're talking about a very important topic. Obviously, if you're watching the news at all, you see we live in very interesting times, to say the least. I will certainly touch upon some of it tonight. Obviously, we're just going to kind of whet your appetite as to prophecy and the power of prophecy. And I appreciate Perry did an excellent job of presenting Jesus Christ. And when you look at the Bible, he is the central character of this book. Actually, Christianity rises and falls on Jesus Christ, in particular his resurrection. And so Perry did an excellent job of showing, well before Jesus even came to planet Earth 2,000 years ago, it was predicted, it was prophesied, all the things that he did. And the only way to explain that, by the way, is that there really is a God, and that this really is an inspired book by God, God being the author. So I think it was important that Perry laid that foundation, that you understand that reality, that this, in fact, it really is divine, because it not only predicted Jesus coming, it has a lot to say about the future. And that's what I want to talk about briefly to you tonight. So if it was right on predicting all the things that the Messiah would do, it certainly is going to be right about the future. And most of us, my guess is very interested in the future and what the Bible has to say about the future. By the way, just so that we're all on the same page, we began the end of times at the resurrection of Jesus Christ. A lot of people don't know that, but the end of days, or the end of times, began with Jesus' resurrection. So we've been in the end of times, biblically speaking, and that also confuses people, but we've been in the end of times for almost 2,000 years. The question is, and I'm sure what you want to know, are we near the end of the end? And I believe that we are, and I'll show you some things tonight, just very briefly. I mean, it's pretty intricate, but I just want to give you 4 prophecies, 4 predictions the Bible makes about the future, all right? So that's all I'm going to give you tonight. 4 predictions, all right? Here we go. Number 1, it says that Jesus is returning soon. The Bible tells us that Jesus Christ will return to planet Earth bodily. He, in fact, is going to return at a time called Armageddon. Most of us are familiar with Armageddon. It is an actual place. It's actually with an H, Harmageddon. It's the Valley of Megiddo, a hill, and it probably refers to a valley in Israel that's about 60, 70 miles long, 20 to 30 miles wide. And if you're a history buff, you know that many of the major battles actually occurred in the Valley of Armageddon. Anyone who's a general and anyone who likes to fight says, if I could have a battle, I'd want to be in the Valley of Armageddon. It's set up, it's tailor-made for military battles and whatnot. So interestingly enough, God picks out, probably on planet Earth, the best place to have that final climatic battle known as Armageddon. And Jesus Christ is going to come back, and he is going to appear in this battle called Armageddon. And we see this, by the way, in Revelation chapter 19, verses 11 through 21. So I want to look at those just for a moment. It says this: I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. His eyes are like blazing fire. Now this is the Jesus, by the way, most of us probably are not too familiar with. So that speaks of, by the way, omniscience. And on his head are many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one knows but himself. And we're going to see that name, I believe, in just a moment. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood. This is a God who's ready for battle. This is a God who's ready to judge. And his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen. So in other words, behind Jesus Christ are going to be all of the believers who have ever lived. And that's going to be something. Hopefully, my guess is many of you tonight would hope that you're going to be part and you're going to be riding with Jesus. So it's not only Jesus, by the way, entering this final battle, it is also all the believers who have ever believed are going to be with him. My prayer is that you would be one of those, and that I would be one of those. And it says, so the armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. Kind of doesn't sound like the ooey gooey Jesus that you kind of hear in church, right? Too often. This is a holy God. This is a God, by the way, unfortunately, that isn't talked about much. But God, it is true, he loves you and he loves me. He loves us so much, though, he wants us to be like him, to be holy. And he is going to come in judgment, and that's what we're seeing here. And it continues on. On his robe, now here, watch this. On his robe and on his thigh, he has this name written. I believe this is the name that was being referred to earlier. King of kings and Lord of lords. Jesus Christ is the King, the Lord of the universe. He's the King of kings and the Lord of lords. And I do pray that he is your King and that he is your Lord. And it said, I saw an angel standing in the sun who cried in a loud voice to all the birds flying in midair, come, gather together for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, generals, and the mighty, and of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all people, free, slave, great, and small. Then I saw the beast. Now watch, this is amazing. Then I saw the beast. And we're going to talk about the beast in a moment, who the beast is. And the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to wage war against the rider on the horse and his army. Isn't that amazing? So if you look at Revelation, it's an incredible book, but you're going to see, and also just absolutely incredible plagues that occur on the earth, especially when you look at the seventh seal and the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowl judgments. There's not a whole lot left, but whatever is left, they gather in the Valley of Armageddon. So all the armies that are left, all of the Antichrist armies, all the people that are left, they gather in this valley, and they're going to see Jesus coming there, and they're really going to try to shoot him out of the air. Now that sounds bizarre to me, but they're going to try it. So it just shows you that we're not that's why we're called sheep, by the way, in the Bible. Sheep are not very smart. So we are going to try to blow God out with some cannons. I don't know. It's going to be kind of interesting. I want a ringside seat to this, like I said. But it said, but the beast was captured, with it the false prophet who had performed the signs on its behalf. With these signs, he had deluded. And by the way, with these signs, he has deluded. Do not underrate what's going to happen. I'm going to talk about a man in a moment. This man's going to be very powerful that's going to come on the earth, and he's going to have the ability to create great delusion. Most people will buy the delusion. I don't think there's anything worse that can happen to a person than to live in delusion. You say, well, how can I make sure that I'm not deluded? The greatest way you can make sure you're not deluded, by the way, is to know the truth. The truth is what protects you. When you know the truth, then you cannot be deluded, you cannot be deceived. The problem is, biblically speaking, it says that most people don't know the truth. Furthermore, it says that we repress the truth. That's the most dumb thing you can do. Jesus says that those who know the truth, those who walk in the truth will walk in freedom. So I really challenge you tonight to read this, to really read this book, to know it. This is the greatest safety that you have, is to know the truth. But there's a man coming, by the way, who is going to be able to create quite a delusion. And then it said, with these signs, he had deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. The two of them were thrown alive in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. By the way, that's hell. There is a hell, there is a heaven, and there is a hell. The rest were killed with the sword coming out of his mouth, the rider on the horse, and all the birds gorged themselves on their flesh. By the way, the Battle of Armageddon is a very short battle, probably lasts 1 minute. Jesus just says the word, and all these people are annihilated. So Jesus is coming back to planet Earth. He's going to appear at what we call the Battle of Armageddon. The Bible predicts, and so you want to know how soon is that going to happen? I'll get to that in a moment. The Bible, though, secondly, I want to hit tonight, predicts a man by the name of the Antichrist. There is a man coming called the Antichrist. By the way, anti can mean either against or in place of. So there's someone coming who is either going to be against Jesus, which is true, but he's also going to seek to be in place of Jesus. He is going to present himself as the ultimate Messiah. False Messiah, but he's going to present himself as a Messiah. I call him the super politician. The Apostle John writes about him in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 18. He says, "Dear children, this is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now there are many Antichrists have come." In other words, there's many people who have claimed to be the Christ, claimed to be a Messiah figure. This is how we know that it is the last hour. Then the Apostle John writes this. He, by the way, wrote the book of Revelation. This is found in Revelation chapter 13 and verses 1 through 4. He said, "Then I saw a beast rising up out of the sea." Now you want to know who that beast is. This beast, by the way, is the final empire. This is the empire that the Antichrist will rule. One of the reasons why people have difficulty, by the way, with Revelation is when you hear the beast or being talked about the beast not only refers to the empire that the Antichrist will rule, but it also refers to the Antichrist himself. They can be interchangeable, so it does create confusion. But the Bible not only predicts, by the way, that there's going to be a super politician called the Antichrist, it predicts that there is going to be a new world order. You ever heard of that term before? If you listen to many of the presidents, starting really with George Bush, the older one, then Clinton, then the younger Bush, and then you listen to Barack Obama, they all talk about NWO, the New World Order. The Bible also predicts that. The Bible predicted thousands and thousands of years ago, at the end of days, the world would be one again. So there will be a one world government temporarily ruled by a person known as the Antichrist. So what you're seeing described, by the way, in Revelation 13 is this end-time empire rising. And you say, well, what is this end-time empire? And we'll look at it a little in a moment. It says, "Then I saw a beast rising out of the sea. It had 7 heads and 10 horns." A lot of people want to know, well, what are those 7? I mean, if you were to draw this thing out, it looks like a ferocious beast. It looks kind of like a weird beast, to be honest. And people wonder, what are the 7 heads? The 7 heads are the 7 previous great empires, okay, of the world as far as God is concerned. So what you're looking at is the end time empire is going to be the most ferocious, the greatest empire to ever be. And you still want to know what that is. So what are the 7 previous great empires according to God? Anybody know? It's Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. That's 6. And you say, well, what is the 7th empire? The 7th empire is what we call the revived Roman Empire. And we're going to look at this in a moment. The Roman Empire shall revive. And I'll show you just in a moment, biblically speaking. And so it said, then I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. 10 horns, by the way, those represent power. So this final end-time empire is not only going to be an amalgamation of all the previous empires, but it's going to have 10 premiers, 10 presidents, 10 rulers over it, okay? But there's going to be one ruler over those 10 rulers. We call him the Antichrist. So with 10 horns, with 10 crowns on its horns. And written on each head were names that blaspheme God. So in other words, this empire will be anti-God. The beast, this beast looked like a leopard. By the way, and this is coming out of Daniel, the leopard represents the Grecian Empire, or Alexander's empire, but it had the feet of a bear, that's the Medo-Persian Empire, and the mouth of a lion, that's the Babylonian Empire. So that's how we really know that the heads are really these previous great empires. Context always gives you the correct interpretation. And the dragon, that is Satan. Satan gave the beast, that is the empire and the Antichrist, his own power and throne and great authority. And by the way, just as there's a Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, there is the unholy Trinity of Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. And then it says this, I saw that one of the heads of the beast seemed wounded beyond recovery, but the fatal wound was healed. The whole world marveled at this miracle and gave allegiance to the beast. So a lot of people think, wow, that means that the Antichrist is somehow going to be assassinated. He's going to have some kind of head wound. But that would really not to be following what the Bible said previously, context determined. It's got to be one of the heads. And what's really going to happen here is it's the 6th head. It's speaking of Rome looked like it's finished. A lot of people think that the Roman Empire is done and was finished, maybe, depending on how you view history, somewhere around 400 AD or so. But the reality, as far as God's concerned, Rome has continued on. Although it didn't continue on as an actual empire, its culture continued on. So, for example, you see in the West, whether it's Europe, the United States, Rome has continued on. Have you ever looked at Washington, D.C.? Look at the Lincoln, the Jefferson Memorial, look at the White House. All of that's Roman and Grecian architecture, Greek architecture. By the way, if you look at the founding fathers, their great desire was to revive the Roman Empire. And so the Roman Empire is going to be revived again, and people are going to be amazed, and the Antichrist is going to rule this Roman Empire. It says the whole world marveled at the miracle and gave allegiance to the beast. So the whole world's going to follow this beast who was controlling this empire. So in other words, for a moment in time, for a 7-year period, probably a little less, there's going to be a one world empire, a one world order, a new world order with the Antichrist at the head. And it says they worship the dragon for giving the beast such power, and they also worship the beast. Who is as great as the beast, they exclaim. Who is able to fight against him? So people are going to follow the Antichrist. They're going to follow this empire. By the way, when we talk about the Antichrist, a lot of people think, wow, this is going to be really a bad man, and he is. But it's going to fool you because, we think that he's going to, be in a red jumpsuit, with hooves and all that kind of stuff. That's not going to be so. This world ruler, by the way, is going to be very intelligent. He's going to be very smooth. He's going to appear to you probably as a Christian. A lot of people think that Adolf Hitler, right? We all know Adolf Hitler. How many think Adolf Hitler was evil? Most of us would probably say that, yes, Adolf Hitler was an evil man. Do you realize, first of all, that he was worshipped, that he was very popular with the German people, number one? He was very charismatic, number 2. And number 3, do you know that he would have photo ops? He told everybody he was a Christian. Do you know that? You would see photo ops, you would see Adolf Hitler coming out of churches on purpose. So he was telling everybody, hey, I'm a Christian just like you're a Christian. So, that's what we're talking about, deception. So when we're talking about this Antichrist, we're talking about someone who is very bright, very smooth. He's going to be very deceptive, and he's going to be very brilliant. And people are really going to be fooled by this. And again, the Bible refers to people as sheep. And that's not a positive thing. Sheep really aren't very bright. They tend to follow almost anything. So the Bible predicts that there's going to be an Antichrist. That's the second one. The third thing I want us to see is the Bible. And someone says to me, well, how in the world, a lot of people think this is just nutty. They think it's impossible that there's going to be a new world order, there's going to be a one world government, and there's going to be this guy called the Antichrist. They go, how in the world can that happen? It just doesn't seem possible that there could be this one world government with this ruler ruling over this one world government. How in the world can it happen? And it can happen through an economic collapse. In fact, the Bible predicts that in the end of days, there is going to be an economic collapse. In fact, that is going to be the Antichrist ticket to coming to power. And we see here in Revelation chapter 17 and verses 1 through 6 this. It says this, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on the many waters. So you're wondering, who is this great prostitute? Waters, by the way, represents people, all the people of the earth, all of the empires. So I want you to see the position. The prostitute, whoever she is, she's sitting, she's controlling all the people, all the kings, all the rulers. And look what it says. With her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. In other words, everyone has consorted. Whoever this prostitute is, every single one of us has consorted with her. We have bowed to her. She is controlling. Whoever this prostitute is, she controls empires, kingdoms, rulers, common people. Who is this prostitute? It says this then in verse 3. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. Does that sound familiar? So whoever this woman is, whoever this prostitute is, she also controls the Antichrist and his ability to rise as well as the kingdom. So this is one powerful prostitute, right? This is one powerful person. Who has that power? I want to continue on. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The name, now watch this, the name written on her forehead was a mystery. So here's the mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman, this prostitute, was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore the testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. So who is this prostitute? It says Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. A lot of people have wondered, what did Babylon do? A lot of people say it was false religion, and it is true. Out of Babylon did come false religions. But that's not what made Babylon the great prostitute. By the way, not every king, not every person's consorted with false religion, something other than Judaism or Christianity. But there is something that everyone, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Jew, whether you're Hindu, whether you're atheist, whether you're agnostic, whether you're Christian, there's something that we all have consorted with that has controlled us. And what Babylon did do, by the way, is they coined money. Babylon coined money. The great prostitute is money. That is what all the kings have consorted to. That's what all the kings have bowed down to. That's what all the empires have bowed down to. That is what, in fact, all of us basically have bowed down to. When push comes to shove, we will do almost anything for money. Money is basically what controls this world. In fact, Jesus said it like this. Do you know the great competitor to God? The greatest competitor to God is money. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24, He said, you cannot serve two masters. You will hate the one and love the other. You will be devoted to the one and you will despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And see, the ticket, by the way, to the Antichrist rising to power is going to be the economy. In fact, Bill Clinton ran. I was a political science major, by the way. It's called, and do you remember what Clinton said? It's the economy, stupid. If you look at Adolf Hitler, and by the way, God always mirrors what he's going to do. He foreshadows and gives us a foreshadowing of what's going to happen. He gave us that foreshadowing back, by the way, in World War II in the person of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler is a very fascinating person. And the reason why he's fascinating is because he really foreshadows. He forepictures what we call the Antichrist. And Hitler rises to power not in a way that most people really don't understand. In the early 1920s, by the way, after Germany lost World War I, they signed a ridiculous treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, that really put them in economic quandary. And so Hitler saw that, and Hitler, as early as 1921, tried a coup d'etat. It failed. He went to jail, and in jail, by the way, he wrote a book called Mein Kampf. He was released a year later, and he toiled and he tried to gather power for the Nazi Party. Nothing was happening. Then a year called 1929 happened. Anybody know what happened in 1929? The stock market crashed. Oh, let me tell you, please listen to me very clearly from this point on. A crisis is a dictator's best friend. An evil dictator's best friend is crisis. And if they don't have one, they'll create one to get power. You and I will give up our freedoms when a crisis occurs. We will give it over to a dictator if they promise us money, job, health care plan, vacation plan. Do you know what Hitler did in 1929? 1929, Germany was hit worse almost than anybody else. They experienced triple-digit inflation. Listen to this now, high unemployment. And here you are, you're a husband or a wife, you're sitting at the dinner table. You can't put food on the table. You can't even take care of your kids medically. And someone comes to you and they say, hey, I can give you a job. I'll even give you a medical plan. I'll even give you a vacation plan. What do you say? You say, where do I sign up? Just be honest. The German people in droves said, where do I sign up to Adolf Hitler? And let me tell you something. Hitler was an evil person. In fact, he began loading up, and he made the Jews the enemy, the bad boy. He began loading up cattle cars. I'm not kidding. He was putting Jews, he was putting political dissidents in these cattle cars, just cramming them in there. And they were screaming, and they would go through the German countryside, whether it was Auschwitz or Treblinka. The German people knew what they heard the screams, and you know what they did? They turned their head. Oh, no, the German people have great collective guilt about what happened. They know exactly what was happening, but they were willing to allow that to happen because they were getting a job from Adolf Hitler. They were getting a medical plan. They were getting a vacation plan. And if you don't think it can happen again, oh, it can happen again. It can really happen again. In fact, I'm going to tell you tonight as we finish out almost that it is going to happen again, and I believe it's going to happen very soon. You say, well, how can you say that? Well, let me give you something just to think about here. Most of us are familiar with 9/11, right? There's Adolf Hitler. Puts terror in you when you think about it. Most of us are familiar with 9/11, aren't we? 9/11 is kind of interesting, and I have to confess, I didn't think a lot about it. I recognize that, you know, America's no paragon of morals or whatnot. And a lot of preachers said that this was probably the judgment of God. That got a lot of flack, by the way, for saying that. But what was interesting is that, I don't know if I got a pic, there he is. The next day, do you know who that man is? That man is Tom Daschle. Tom Daschle was a Senate Majority Leader. So after 9/11, okay, Tom Daschle gets up, he speaks to the entire United States who's in shock, And he gives us about a four. You can get it. You can Google this thing. You can see Tom Daschle's speech, 9/11, the day after. So it was on 9/12, and he quotes in his speech an interesting passage. Here's what he quotes. Okay, he quotes a passage out of Isaiah that was written in 700 BC. No, this is bizarre. So you've got our major Senate Majority Leader, and he's quoting this passage. The bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with dressed stone. The fig trees have been felled, but we will replace them with cedars. Now, he was quoting that as if, that was to comfort you and I. Hey, okay, so bin Laden did this to us, but so what? What we're going to do here is we're going to, so the bricks have fallen down, but we're going to rebuild with better dressed stone. The fig trees have fallen, but we're going to replace them with cedars. By the way, the context of that was the Assyrians attacking the northern kingdom of Israel. And Israel said this back to God. In other words, they were saying to God, that should have happened to Israel. If Israel was obedient to God, God promised them protection. So in about 720 BC, when Assyria came and attacked the northern kingdom, they should have gone, holy Toledo, holy mother of pearls, what's happening here? How can God be allowing this to happen to us? It was because they had been sinning. They had been breaking the covenant. But instead of repenting, what the Israelites did is they said to God, you know what, so what? The bricks have fallen down. We're going to rebuild. We're going to be bigger and we're going to be better. So the fig trees have been felled. We'll replace them with cedars. So this is what our Senate majority, it's bizarre. I don't know, who one of his aides was or a speechwriter, but to dig this out is absolutely spellbinding. Isaiah 9:10 is quoted the next day to the entire America. It is a judgment passage. And I don't know if you remember, I was a pastor. I've been a pastor for 30 years. It was interesting. Do you remember what the American people initially did? We went to church. Does anybody know how long it lasted? It lasted less than a month, and actually the attendance was less than before 9/11. That's how long we lasted. And the interesting thing is, if you can check this up for yourself, we actually, with the Freedom Towers, we actually fulfilled the Isaiah 9:10 prophecy. There is actually a huge stone out of the Adirondacks that's at the foundation of the Freedom Towers. Did you know that? And where there was a sycamore tree, we replaced it with a cedar. No, it's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. We literally fulfilled it. So we said this to God. Now, here's what's intriguing. 7 years later, missing that one picture. What happened in the newspaper picture? You got it? 7 years later to the month. No, I want you to understand. Here's what happened 7 years later to the month from 9/11. So that would be 2008 in September, probably to the day. So we did this to God and said, so what? And 7 years later, 2008, September 28th, 2008, the stock market, so 7 years later, the stock market falls 777.7 points, 7% of its value. Now, that's a lot of sevens, ladies and gentlemen. Now, do you know whose number that is in the Bible? That's God's number. So, now I want you to get this now. 7 years later, now, you can believe in coincidences if you want, and that's fine. That's up to you. But 7 years later, the market falls 777.7 points. You go check it out. He's getting the headline. 7% of its value. God is saying, I'm bringing judgment on you. He goes, I'm bringing economic judgment on you, by the way. And we're still reeling from that. Now, you do the math. I believe, by the way, at that point, God brought final judgment on America. In other words, God said at this point, I'm not going to judge you. And you can read Romans 1 for yourself because we're way late. You read Romans 1 for yourself. It says, and God will turn you over. And God turned them over. And God turned them over. Now, you do the math. 7 years from 2008. You just do the math. 7 years is 2015, September. I've got a lot more. I just don't have time tonight. I'm going to tell you with everything in my heart, you're going to see a lehola. That's in Italian means a big hole. You're going to see a crash like you've never seen before economically. There it finally is. There was one of the headlines. There was one of the headlines. And, I know there's all kinds of, it reminds me in Israel, all kinds of false, everything's going to be fine. They would, you had Jeremiah, you had Ezekiel say, hey, judgment is coming, judgment is coming, judgment is coming. And then you would have these false teachers, and we got them around, everything's cool, everything's fine. God said, they're just throwing whitewash on the wall. And I'm sorry that that's happening, but I'm telling you, judgment is coming. Judgment is absolutely coming. And the Bible predicts that when, and let me tell you, if this is right and America experiences major economic judgment, by the way, it will be worldwide. It's just not us, ladies and gentlemen. It will be worldwide. The life you know will be forever changed. And you will see a worldwide, by the way, recession, depression. And this will be, I believe, the Antichrist ticket and the New World Order to power. We'll see. The final thing I just want to leave you with is the Bible predicts that in the end of days, by the way, Israel will be in the land. Now, people were saying for like 1000 AD, they would go, the end is coming, the end is coming. And I've heard all this gobbledygook, whoa, what do you say? People have been saying for years the end is coming, the end is coming. Well, hello, the end couldn't come until Israel was in the land. So it was ridiculous when people were saying that. Israel must be in the land for the end of days to occur. So the Bible said that. And so for years when people were saying the end is coming, Bible scholars said, no, the end can't be coming because Israel still isn't in the land. Israel is what we call, by the way, the super sign. And if you're familiar with the Jews lost their land, by the way, in 70 AD. 70 AD, they not only got Jerusalem wiped out by Titus and Vespasian, let me tell you, that thing was level. They were also expelled from the land. No people who have ever been expelled from their land have ever regained it. And that's why people said, come on, you got to be kidding. You can't be serious and tell me that the Jews are going to get their land back. But those who believed in the inspiration of Scripture and Bible prophecy said, absolutely, the Jews in the end of days will get their land back. And something interesting happened. World War II was horrible. 6 million Jews were butchered, and it was horrible. But you know what? God used that in an incredible way because the world was sorrowful. The world repented and said, interestingly enough, the Jews need to have their land back. And it says this. And it says this in Isaiah 43, verses 5 through 6. It's a great prophetic book. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bring your children from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up. And to the south, do not hold them back. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth. By the way, that never happened to Israel. That never happened to the Jewish people until 1948. In 1948, they came from the east, the west, the north, and the south. And then, Perry already read this one, in Isaiah 66:8, this is a great prophecy. Who has ever heard of such things? Who has ever seen such things like this? Can a country be born in a day, or a nation be brought forth in one moment? Yet no sooner is Zion in labor than she gives birth to her children. How can a country be born in a day? That's an interesting thought. And you know what? I had this before. And did we get that picture of David Ben Gurion? Right there. On May 14th, 1948, at 4 p.m., the Jewish leader David Ben Gurion stepped up to the podium at the Tel Aviv Art Museum. And here's what he said. Here's part of his speech. The right is the natural right of the Jewish people to be masters of their own fate, like all nations in their own sovereign state. Accordingly, we here assembled by virtue of our natural and historic right, and on the strength of the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations, hereby declare the establishment of the Jewish state in Israel to be known as the state of Israel. And in one day, Israel became a nation again. And I want you to know, the Bible makes it clear they'll never lose it again. No, and all that you see, the caliphate developing, I don't care what Iran, Ahmadinejad, all what they say, Israel's not losing that. you're seeing the super sign. That's how you know that you're in the end of the days. But you're looking at some of the greatest prophetic times, in my opinion, to occur. Wish we had a lot more time. But continue to read the Bible, continue to ask the Holy Spirit, and He will reveal more things to you. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
There's a little time for any questions. Questions for Frank, questions for me. It's open for questions.
Who do you think the two witnesses will be? Elijah and Enoch, or Moses and Elijah?
Frank, you better get back up here.
I mean, no one actually knows. I mean, for sure, so it's a guess. Obviously, most people say it would be Moses, because Moses was a great lawgiver, and you saw him on the Mount of Transfiguration. And others say the other one is Elijah. Elijah was taken up, in a whirlwind. But that remains to be seen. I mean, some people think it's Enoch because Enoch never tasted death, as well as Elijah never did either.
It could be a reality show for the world.
Yeah. But they're going to be two very powerful people to deal with. Yeah. But, yes.
I'm just curious what you consider now at this time, the amount of time of a generation related to 1948 and the scriptures right after that.
Yeah, and
It used to be 40 years now.
right, but I think you're referring. I think it's a misunderstood saying what Jesus said: "This generation shall not pass," which sees the signs. So, and then he says, just as you see the fig tree sprouting, that summertime is in. So it's an analogy that he's used, and that was a mistake. So what he's saying is, when you see these signs, just as when you see, buds, on a fig tree, that summer is near. He's saying when you see all these signs in Revelation, my nearing is near. So he's not saying that. See, a lot of people, that was a mistake made, and that's why we get in trouble. Because let's see, 1948, a generation's 40 years. I remember 1988, rapture, occurs beforehand, 7 years. So, oh wow, 1981 is the rapture. And of course, that was incredibly wrong and incredibly stupid. And so we lose credibility, honestly. And so I'm one of these guys, let's cut it right, let's cut it straight, and really what Scripture says. So, but yeah, good question. Anybody else? Got one for? There will at church, but.
Of course, prophecy is so huge, and we just scratched the surface. Next, we're going to do on the Bible and science, but we could do another one of these after that. But you can come here, Frank, too. At church, he's going to be talking about this in the fall.
But I think you're going to see more and more interest as you see this caliphate developing, as you see economic calamity developing. It's just how people work. And you'll see, I think, a lot more and more interest in what the Bible has to really say, which is the only credible thing, by the way, in terms of the future.
Anybody else? Should we stock up on peanut butter?
If you like it.
That's it. Thank you very much.